The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, I'm talking with Dr. Joel Rosen, otherwise known as the Adrenal Fatigue Ninja. We talked for almost an hour and we discussed why adrenal fatigue exists, how we can be aware of it and the symptoms of it, and what we can do about it. It was a great discussion. So if you or someone you know is suffering with extreme exhaustion and has no answers as to why, this is the podcast for you. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Naturally Inspired Podcast with Dr. Joel Rosen. Thank you so much for being on the Naturally Inspired Podcast today.
Yeah.
I found all your stuff on YouTube and on Instagram and stuff so informative. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
Love what you're doing. This is a topic that I don't think a lot of people know about, but I think there is a lot of people suffering from this.
Right. Yes, absolutely. It's an epidemic.
Yeah. So I want to dive into a little bit of your background. Just, where are you located now?
I'm in Boca Raton, Florida.
Okay. And you have a center there?
I have a brick and mortar business here, but I'm trained as a chiropractor, but I don't see people in that context anymore, Tammy. And I had already made the pivot prior to what's going on now to be seeing people remotely all over the world. And so this has been another pivot in terms of really not having the limited amount of people that were coming in to see me, even less now. So I don't know if I really need the physical location. I mean, I split the office with another doctor and the rent is manageable, but it's still more than it would be if I just had a suite somewhere. And so we'll see when it comes time to renew. But I still have my holdovers that I still see from time to time, that after 5 or 6 or 7 hours of consulting intellectually, I'm happy to get up off my butt and start to do some work on clients and just take my mind off of things. But I keep my license active. I just don't see myself really needing the brick and mortar anymore, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating, the shift that's happening?
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
I'm fortunate that I had already begun that. However, my main coaching program is a big investment, and not a lot of people that I've been seeing have been enrolling in that. So I've done smaller versions of that, which is fine. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, my goal would be to not work one-on-one with people, to be honest with you, more content creation, done for you, information products, private labeling, podcasting, appearances, stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, it's a great way to get your message out. And I think, there are more of us that are exposing these ideas, the better. Right. And if you can reach, the more people you can reach, because I think one of the things we talk about here on the Naturally Inspired Podcast is that you are smart enough to figure this out.
Right. For sure. It's not for the lack of being smart.
Right.
Or not for the lack of trying. It's just the ignorance, perhaps, and not having it available. I mean, it's a perfect epitome of a controlled message through the government with what's going on right now, which limits the access of information. Yeah, for sure.
Right. But the more we seek it, the more we will force that information to be available to us.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. I
right? When we're
agree. Yep.
looking for it. So tell me a little bit about your personal story, because I know just going through your videos and stuff, I learned that you suffered from adrenal fatigue yourself.
Right.
Is this the way you kind of got on the path of natural medicine?
Oh, no, I had already wanted to be on the path of natural medicine prior to me burning out. I grew up in a traditional medically trained family. So my mother is a
Oh, cool.
public health nurse in Toronto. So they would go into the school systems and immunize the children. And
Yeah.
we would always have those on hand for whenever we traveled or my schedule. My sister's a family practice doctor. My uncle is a dermatologist. My cousin is a surgeon. So I was raised in a traditional medically based family, and I never wanted to be a doctor myself until I studied exercise physiology in college, and I was really big into exercise and activity. And then I hurt my back and
Mm,
weight training, and as a result, it was suggested for me to do surgery. And I really rebelled against that, thinking that, hey, my background's in rehab. I was a trainer at the time,
right.
and so that's where the epiphany of discovering chiropractic came into my life. And I'm like, okay, this is what I want to do.
Oh,
So I ended
interesting.
up, yeah. So I ended up, I screwed around my first 2 years of college, and I had to go back to get my GPA upgraded so that I could get into chiropractic college in Canada, which was very competitive at the time. It still is,
Yep.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so I earned a second degree in psychology, which I didn't realize how much that would impact what I'm doing today. And
Right.
sure. And then basically, so I was always on the path of exercise and health and natural approaches, and really the black sheep rebeller of the family in terms of holistic approaches. When you can do holistic approaches, then embrace that. And then my own injury with my back led me down the chiropractic path until I burnt out again. So my wife was pregnant with twins. I had over $200,000 of student debt, and I was in a new country, and I hurt my back again, and I was
Ugh,
burnt out, exhausted, and here I was having to start my own practice
right.
with 3 mouths to feed. And that's where I learned about the term adrenal fatigue. I had a acupuncturist as a patient brought in a book called "Why Do I Have Thyroid Symptoms Even Though My Blood Tests Are Normal." It's a
Yeah.
great book. And then I always joke around when I got to the section on adrenal fatigue. I somehow they had a picture of me. I say, like, they described me to a T, and I hadn't even heard of it. And here I was, a graduate in chiropractic, a doctor of chiropractic. I had an exercise physiology degree, and I had a psychology degree, and I had no idea what is this. I've never
Right.
even heard of this.
Right.
So I thought, if I've never heard of this, then who else has never heard of this? And that's where the genesis of where I am, a lot of stuff in between, but that pretty much explains the story of how I got to where I got to. Yeah.
Right. So, but you can clearly identify with your patients treating them then in this
Sure.
department.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that makes someone more empathetic and more understanding and taking people seriously, especially when it's a diagnosis that's not accepted,
Right.
and when you're looked at like you're crazy or there's nothing wrong with you. And I see that all time and time again, over and over again.
Yeah. I want to talk about that for sure. What's the process? Okay. So, adrenal fatigue, this is something that, we kind of hear about here and there in natural health articles. But when we go to a doctor, if we're going to bring up adrenal fatigue, what do we get told?
Yeah, listen, I've come full circle on this, because at that, like I just mentioned, I didn't even hear of the term, and then I became a major advocate of the term, and then I decided to create a website called The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue,
Okay.
and so really my new truth is that it's a lousy name. It's really a bad name.
Okay.
If you look at like the pure interpretation of adrenal fatigue, I once interviewed someone and said you kind of get the feeling like the adrenals are on the beach, just recovering from being exhausted and burnt out and rejuvenating. And to an extent, the adrenals are overwhelmed, but very seldomly, unless it is an adrenal insufficiency, which is Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune disease, do the adrenals ever really stop producing cortisol. There's a lot of physiological changes that occur that doctors don't take into consideration. They'll just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. We don't have peer-reviewed journals in our literature. We're not being taught it in school. And when you come to us telling us that you have adrenal fatigue, it's a tell of the fact that this person is doing their own research, that they may be a little crazy.
Right. I was going to say the Dr. Google flag. Oh, you've just been playing with Dr. Google.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I recommend that clients don't go to the doctor and say they have adrenal fatigue.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
Yeah. There's research that talks about cell danger response, where your body prioritizes when it's been under stress for so long, it prioritizes its sequence of events in terms of, like, I always use the analogy, if I had a limited income and I have a lot of expenses, I'm not traveling on vacation, I'm not buying luxury items, I'm hoping to just keep the lights on.
You're buying food.
Yeah, and that's what the basics, that's what your body does. And so it loses its ability to maintain homeostasis, or what we say, the allostatic load of the body exceeds the supply of the body, and the body prioritizes. So I say, as a way for you to go to the doctor, ask them if they've ever heard of cell danger response, because that's a way to let the doctors know that you know that they know that you know that they haven't done their research on that. So,
right.
And if they do know that, then you can talk the same language, and you could say that there's pituitary involvement, there's prioritization in the body, mineral deficiencies, fluid imbalances, inflammation control. And then that way you're getting more to the physiological things that are actually happening versus the adrenals that don't completely poop out like the term suggests.
I see. That's good to know. Because then you're almost, doctors and nurses, they see so many people, and especially when they're in like emergency room situations, say they're seeing a lot of the same people, and they become desensitized to your complaints. Right.
Yeah.
And then, so if you're throwing around terms like adrenal fatigue or this or that, the doctors and nurses get desensitized to that, and they start to think, oh, another one of those.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's unfortunate too, because it's very real.
Yep.
And I always say, like, the other thing I say to people is that the adrenals are the thermostat of the temperatures that are going on in the body, the analogy. And you don't blame the thermostat for breaking when the elements are causing it to be too high or too cold.
Right.
It is the elements that are impacting the thermostat. And it's not just impacting the thermostat, it's impacting the entire environment. And that's the same thing with our body, is when we're under all these stressors. And that's how you really have to explain to people stressors, because people think of stressors as psychosocial, like mental stress, like, oh, I'm not under stress, I have a good marriage,
Right.
finances aren't too problematic, I enjoy my job, and we explain that stressors are environmental that you don't even realize, like Wi-Fi is a major stressor, molds or mycotoxins are major stressors, minerals that are deficient in your foods and your soils are major stressors, sitting down on your butt all day is major stressors, not getting good quality air is major stressors, so there's a lot of stressors that your bodies have to manage on a daily basis, more so than I think we did have to manage 75, 100 years ago. Absolutely, and that's what plays into some of the genetic susceptibilities that I teach people that have the perfect storm, Tammy, of the environmental triggers overlapping with the genetic susceptible loaded guns,
Right.
creating perfect storms in the body. And that's what's called cell danger and or mitochondrial fatigue.
Hmm.
People will like to call it HPA axis dysfunction as a more updated term for adrenal fatigue. But I think even that is short-sighted and limited in terms of it's not just impacting the HPA axis, it's impacting your cell's ability to produce energy at the cellular level.
Right. So that's one thing that we talk a lot about too on the podcast is how our body works as a system, and it's very systematic. And often in the traditional medical model, when we have something wrong, we have a pain in our knee, it's all focused on the knee, right? When in actuality, you may actually have a back issue,
Right,
and we're
right.
not looking at it systemically, and especially when it comes to hormones and even digestion. If you want to talk gut health, there's it's not one thing that you're having a problem with. This is just the way your body's presenting the problem and trying to communicate with you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the way that got born was through specialization.
Right.
So you have doctors that specialize, which is great. But the fact is the body generalizes. And so I explain to people, you have the adrenals, which is looked at as a reductionistic approach, or a specialty is looked at as a reductionistic approach. This is this. You have high blood pressure, take this blood pressure pill. You have high cholesterol, take this cholesterol pill. But the thing is that I explain to the coaching clients that I work with, I tell them that cells come together to make up tissues, and tissues come together to make up organs, and then organs come together to make up a system. And really, at the end of the day, whatever happens at the 30,000 view foot happens at ground zero. And that
Right.
comes down to a general cellular biochemistry approach that doesn't fit with the medical model and or doesn't fit with insurance model and doesn't
Bingo.
fit with the pharmaceutical model either.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons why it works the way it does, unfortunately.
Right. So how can we break it down if we're someone that's feeling, what are symptoms and signs of adrenal fatigue?
Sure. So, I mean, I think initially is just you don't handle your stressors very well. Because if you think about it, like we said, your body is prioritizing and it's not running the show behind the scenes effectively. So inappropriate responses to stress at the physiological level, which can be rapid heart rate if you have a stress. If you're in a warm building, you don't cool down very well. Or if you're in a cold building, you don't warm up very well. Perhaps you stand up and you feel like you're going to faint because your blood pressure doesn't work so well. It's an inappropriate response to the stressor. It doesn't commensurate with the stress that you have. A lot of people say, yeah, I had a stressor and it just, I got overwhelmed and I feel like I'm in sympathetic fight or flight all day long, or I don't have energy. I crash in the middle of the day. My circadian rhythm is off, so I feel
Right.
more energetic at night and less energetic during the day. Those are the clues that you typically look at in terms of you're no longer managing homeostasis in your body the way you should be, and those are all good signs that that's what's going on.
And so you mentioned a lot of, stressors being things that we might not think about. So our environment can, have stressors in it, like toxins and whatnot. But what about our thoughts as well? What?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's where the psychology degree that I thought was unfortunately a waste of time at the time is no
Not so much.
longer a waste of time. Yeah. So I had a great interview with a guest on my podcast, and he talked about what's called the AHPA axis. So the amygdala, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And the amygdala is that part of the brain that puts meaning to the stressor. So it can signal to the hypothalamus, hey, this is a good stress, that's a eustress, or this is
Mhm.
a bad stress, that's a de-stress. So I think it's key. I teach people 5 shifts that they need to learn when it's
Nice.
coming to get better from an adrenal fatigue or a mitochondrial fatigue problem. And that comes down to the first shift, which is your perception of stress. What kind of control do you have? Do you have autonomy over the situation? Can you put a different spin on it? Can you have gratitude for the trials and tribulations? Can you take ownership? And at the end of the day, people have awful, perfect storms like books and novels that it's not fair. It's not fair that they were raised in a family that had such events that occurred. It's not fair that they had trials and tribulations. Um,
Abuse.
yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, the responsibility falls onto them in
Yeah.
terms of no one's going to care as much as you are going to care about getting yourself better. And if
I
you
say
can,
that all the time. I say
yeah,
that
well,
all the
I've
time.
done it before in my practice, and that's what it added to my problem of relapsing with my own fatigue problems, because you care more than other people and getting them better. I always tell them, I'll care as much as you, Tammy, but I'm not going to care more than you. You know,
Right.
it's up to you. So I think perception and the amygdala, and the way you take control, and you have tools to harness the gratitude of those events. Because when I explained earlier, you have the cells, the tissues, the organs, and the system. But on the either side of that, so you have frequencies first. So the frequencies impact how cells are formed, and
Right.
then cells produce tissues, tissues produce organs, organs produce systems. On the outside of systems is frequency again, in terms of, like you mentioned, or I mentioned, is what are your goals? What are your higher purposes? So if you can have the frequency above the cells resonate with the frequencies beyond the systems, that's where you can achieve congruence. And that's a little woo-woo, it's a little bit out there, but
Yeah.
I think you have to use perception as a major tool. And I find the difference between those that really get better and those that don't, they have that as a prerequisite.
Right. Well, you have to have a driver, right? Like right now in our current situation, fear is a major driver. It's steering us to do things or not do things. And likewise in your life, you have to have a driver to get better.
For sure. A why. You need to have a
Yeah.
why. Yeah, for
You
sure.
need to have some way out of the tunnel, right? A light that kind of draws you towards it. Even though you do have a physical, obviously you have a physical thing breaking down, there's something happening, but you have to drive that healing to the light at the
Yeah.
end of the tunnel. And there has to be a reason why.
Yeah. I'll ask people a lot of the times, like, what do you want? Like as you mentioned, and they always say what they don't want.
Yeah.
And you know, it's
They don't
that's
know
not,
what they want. It's
yeah,
been so long.
they haven't given themselves permission,
Yeah.
or even still they don't believe they deserve it,
Yeah.
or they don't believe they're capable. And so there's a lot of that has to be addressed and identified and looked in the mirror to
Right.
be able to understand, okay, I love myself, I'm proud of myself, I forgive myself, I deserve good health, I'm gonna have good health, I am feeling good health. I mean,
Yeah.
those are all huge tools where people will say, oh, that's just, you know, PMA stuff, but
Right.
it's not. It's a prerequisite. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you've integrated that into your program, because I
Yeah.
think it's I don't think you can get anywhere with a crappy attitude or not having a purpose. I really don't. I don't think you can really get past, into healing until you have that purpose
Yeah.
and focus.
It's true, and to their benefit, or with the exception that you have to fix a lot of the physiological things
Of course.
to be able, like, for example, if you have a major microbial overgrowth or C. diff infection, research does show that will slow down your ability to convert dopamine into adrenaline. And then when you have a stressful situation and you have lack of adrenaline, that can create anxiety and overwhelm and sympathetic discharge. And they could, be 40 years of Zen and think, okay, I'm really not stressed, I feel great. But at the end of the
Right.
day, physiologically, it's
You can't
happening.
overcome that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to have both, really.
Yeah. 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 Good point. What are some misdiagnoses that people can look for? So, I hate to see someone that's kind of been struggling with, these signs of not being able to sleep, feeling absolutely exhausted, overwhelmed, not controlling stress well. And then they go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, it's this. And
Yeah.
here's some this to help
Right.
that. So what are some typical things that might have been mentioned to somebody who does have this issue?
Well, a lot of it is mood disorders, right? So you have anxiety, you have bipolar, you have depression.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can prescribe you a psychotherapeutic medicine, which can be good short term. Certainly, if they're not producing effective neurotransmitters or it's not hanging around long enough, those could be helpful. But with the asterisk of you're looking to get to more of the root cause of why, and it's not just that you're weak-willed or you're a pushover.
Right.
I also see that sort of throwaway terms like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really explain physiologically what's happening in the body.
Right.
It just is more of a catch term. And
Right.
then the other thing is that a lot of things that I see is like a hypothyroid problem. So they'll be told you have hypothyroid and take this thyroid med. And while that could be good in the short term, the thyroid is another sensor, like the thermostat in the body, that registers the climate of what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily fix the climate per se. It just helps with the consequence of the climate in the body. So I see a lot of misdiagnosis of hypothyroidism when the hypothyroidism was happening because of the wrong continued over allostatic load that was going on in the body. Your body's actually doing the right thing given the circumstances, and you're just ending and starting there and saying, okay, we'll fix it with this.
Got it.
But
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile, you're not getting to the cause of what's actually going on.
Which is kind of a paradigm shift in our medical, in the field of practicing, general medicine, is that we're always trying to get rid of symptoms and cover them up. And that is our perception that it's healed.
Right. Yeah. It's also a function of the insurance model.
Yeah.
In terms of you manage care, and we don't give you very much time to spend with each patient.
Right.
And it's also a function of the way they assess you in terms of the lab ranges. If you're not failing the grade, then you get a passing grade,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's like a D+ or a C-.
Right. And who knows where your baseline normally is.
Yeah, come see us when you're failing, Tammy. And then when you're failing, we can help you. But until then, maybe just get on some kind of mood stabilizers or, talk to someone about it. It's not really set up to lifestyle changes, dietary approaches,
Right.
good thought processes, activity. It's more lip service than it is actual teaching people how to do it.
Right. Right. And so what are some foods and what is a diet that supports our adrenal health?
I mean, and first and foremost is minerals, good, healthy minerals. And I look at the shift, one of the shifts that I have for explaining the 5 major keys that I see with the best coaching clients that I work with, get better with, was that first shift of the psychological or the perception of stress. One of the other shifts is just nutrient replenishment. So a lot of people will go on autoimmune diets and we remove grains and eggs and soy and corn and wheat and all of those things.
Or go all keto, or, I mean, there's so much information when it comes to diet. It's hard to tell. And we've talked about that before, about it, whether you're helping yourself or harming yourself.
Yeah. And I think before you go straight into that is make sure that you have the basis of nutrients. So getting foods that your grandparents would recognize, that hopefully it's organic, it's not corn fed or wheat fed, it's grass fed, or if it's at least it doesn't have antibiotics or sprays or pesticides.
Right.
Those are always, I always
Clean
say, like,
food.
yeah, clean food. Don't trip over dollars to save pennies.
Yeah.
Get on good, healthy foods and start with that first. And then more of not just so much what the foods is when the foods is. Meaning, I like the idea of getting in a 12-hour eating window so that your last meal's at 6 and your first meal's at 6 or 7 and 7, where I don't feel there should be any reason why you need to eat within 12 hours of your last meal. Maybe we're traveling, maybe we're going through time zones or whatnot. But ultimately, I think we are engineered to be nomads and creatures of the earth with the sun and the moon. And we never had a light bulb and a refrigerator. And now we eat at whatever times of the day, whenever we want. It's easily accessible. And those are more of a challenge than what you're actually eating. It's when you're actually eating. So that's a huge shift. Yeah, too, for sure.
Yeah. And I've seen different things. So you recommend 12-hour feeding window. How do you feel about 14 or some people even 16?
Yeah, I like those. I would want for them to work with someone like myself to know that that's suitable for them.
Okay.
Because if they have demand and supply problems, or if they're in a cell danger response where their body has prioritized and it's only paying the bills to keep the lights on,
Right.
then you may have challenges with going that long, where you're becoming more insulin resistant, or you're not controlling the inflammation that's draining your bank account anyways. So I always say you have to earn the right to do those types of advanced strategies for diet, intermittent fasting. I like it, and I have people use a glucose and ketone meter, so that they understand what their optimal eating window looks like and what's the difference between psychological cravings and physiological hunger. I think that's a huge one. Yeah.
That's a really good statement right there to be kind of dialed into, is because we're so used to, oh, I better eat. Oh, I got to eat. Oh, do you want to get something to eat? It's part of our culture. So like, when was the last time you really felt hungry?
Yeah, you're not gonna die from missing a meal. And I talk to a lot of people that tell me, oh, I'm hypoglycemic. And I say, oh, really? Like, are you using a continual glucose monitor, or you're testing your glucose? And well, no, I mean, I do my blood sugar at the doctor and it comes back and it's, in the 80s or it's in the 70s. And very seldom is it in the 70s or 80s anyway. So I really doubt that a lot of the people that are dealing with exhaustion and burnout are actually hypoglycemic. So
interesting. How does alcohol play into that as well as part of our diet?
So, well, alcohol will produce free radicals, and you have to work hard to break it down. The aldehydes, the byproduct of alcohol, can slow down methylation cycles, so that you're not using those nutrients effectively to produce energy. So I call it like a negative calorie. Like, on the one hand, it's impacting your body's ability to make energy to be able to break it down. And then on the other hand, you're not gaining energy from it. You're not getting, so it's costing you more than it's helping
it's
you.
a real deficit.
It's a deficit. And then it produces histamines, which is, again, a major challenge. Listen, I think it's okay in moderation, provided that you've earned the right to be able to have extra spending currency in the body, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. And so what's moderation?
What's moderation? That's a good question. I'm not sure what the actual levels are, like an ounce. I don't know. I don't really know like how much per day. I know, like, if you look at European countries like France with the resveratrol in wine, and the antioxidants, there's good healthy benefits with that have some better outcomes with heart disease and so forth. But I don't actually know what the stated levels of acceptance are, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I'm just a little concerned because I see a lot of people, given the current situation, that we're stuck at home, and alcohol sales are going through the roof.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think that's not going to be in moderation too, right? And there's
Yeah.
no start time or end time. It's kind
Right.
of like all time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like a glass of wine a day kind of thing,
Right.
if that's what you wanted to do.
Right.
But if you're dealing with an exhaustion and fatigue problem, again, I don't think that'd be the first thing that I would even consider figuring out what moderation is. I would agree that, hey, we need to put the fires out. And
Yes.
and at this point, that's not putting the fires out.
Right. Right. What other things, there's stressors that we talked about, and, we can eat foods, clean foods, to kind of lighten our load as far as toxicity goes. But is there such a thing as, being, um, you know, taxing your adrenal system through exercise? And how does that come into play?
Yeah, I mean, that's moderation too. That's how I initially burnt out myself, was just too much exercise. I was a
Hmm.
trainer, and you would have, say, like a 6 o'clock appointment, a 7 o'clock appointment, and then maybe your next one was at 10 and
Mm-hmm.
11, and then the last one was at 5 and 6. So it would be like a 15, 16-hour day over 6 or 7 hours. And so I would exercise in between and wouldn't take enough time off. And you have to understand that exercise consumes your reservoirs. It consumes
Yeah.
your, as we keep the analogy consistent, your currency in your body. And it also produces free radicals, which can be helpful, but it's too much smoke coming out of the chimney, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And you should understand when to push and when not to push. And a lot of the times people don't have that valve to understand the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I explain to people, like,
And
especially if
also,
you're
what's
building
good
the
for
body.
one person may not be suitable for another.
It's true. Yeah, there's going to be some absolute differences for sure, but I still think relative differences. But absolutely, I think that there needs to be rest and recovery. You can't always water the plant and not take the water away and let the sunlight and nourishment allow it to repair and regenerate. And that's where we get into terms like autophagy and mTOR, and that's the new things coming down the pike. But
Mm.
ultimately, to get back to your question, I think that there's a Goldilocks zone of not enough and too much, that
Right.
is person to person dependent, and
Mm-hmm.
depending on their vitality and their surplus of energy in their body and whatever things are going on, like inflammation, infection, stressful marriages, they
Right.
perception of stressors. They need to understand what their overall load is, and
Yeah.
realize that any perturbance in that load is going to cause the blocks to topple over, so to speak.
Right. Well, you can. I'm already starting to see how, each of these things can really become the perfect storm.
For
Right.
sure.
Like,
Yep.
you got some toxicity coming in, because we're never going to get away from that. We're living in the world. Right. So we've got outside toxins. We're breathing in unclean air. Maybe that's all causing stress. But then you add, a bad relationship into your life that's constantly putting stresses on you. So maybe you're drinking more than you should because you're looking for relief from that stressful situation, but you're still trying to stay healthy, so you're exercising. Right. And maybe you've
Right.
even upped your exercise because you feel like you need that as an outlet. And it's pretty easy to see how this can become the perfect storm.
Well, and that's why we said it's a pandemic, right? Or it's the untold or the untalked about or understood or misunderstood pandemic, that we all have stressors, we all live in a toxic world, and we all multitask. We don't really think about the timing, especially in North America, the work week. And the analogy I use is the browser windows. Like, we open a browser window,
Mm-hmm.
and then we say, oh, let me just open another one and search for something else while I was going to go back to the thing that I was originally going to search for. And
Mm-hmm.
then, on your way there, you looked for something else, and then you sort of lost track of what the original thing was that you were looking for. That's kind of our lives.
Yeah.
And we're so fragmented now. And a lot of people will go into their kitchen and like, okay, what was I going to get again? I forgot what I was going to get, you know? So
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that adds to that perfect storm of we're just overstimulated with overstimulus, with overstimulant, you know, that's
Yeah.
basically what's happening.
Yeah. So you mentioned dopamine a little bit, and one concept that kind of stood out to me in one of your videos was how, people with adrenal fatigue can often, go seeking for dopamine boosts.
Right.
And so that made me think, like, can we become almost addicted to something negative to get this dopamine because our physiological body's not regulating it properly?
Yeah, for sure. And that was a good question I saw that you were sending me. I thought, oh, that's a great question, because it is I won't say morbid, but in an unhealthy way. We do become addicted to that. A lot of the times we're understimulated because of maybe iron challenges or microbial overgrowth challenges, absorption problems, amino acid issues, B vitamin nutrients, genetic susceptibilities. All of those things can make it a perfect storm to not have enough stimulants.
Hmm.
So then we look for the fleeting stimulant that we need, like, almost like a Pavlovian signal from your settings, like your notifications. I got an email. Okay, I get addicted to that. I got a
Right.
text message. I got addicted to that. I need a little pick me up. I'm crashing. I get more coffee. I get addicted to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just develop saturation, or you develop tolerance, like an addiction, where you need ever escalating more amounts of that stimulus to pick you up, to get the less return of the fleeting amount that you don't get at the same levels anymore. And it becomes a vicious cycle of unhealthiness. And I think it's very
Yeah.
real. And I think the way to break that is be aware of it,
Yeah.
and really limit your notifications, put yourself on a circadian rhythm, stick to a routine, eat healthy foods, and then have cheat days, or have
Yeah.
certain time days that you allow yourself to do those things, but you don't get to have dessert every day, so to speak, you know?
Right. Right. I think that ties into our belief system as well. We have to kind of pivot our belief system, and we have to really understand that your body is a system, and when you put good stuff into it and do good stuff to it, it will respond accordingly. It doesn't just put up with all this bullshit
Right,
forever. Like, the
right.
bottom is going to fall out. And I think that's where we need to collectively make a shift in the way we're thinking about our health. We have to
Yeah,
shift this. We have to, you maintain your car. You can't ride on the same tires forever.
right.
And your body is a lot more sensitive than your car's tires.
It's usually not a mystery, Tammy. Like, like I'll use the example, like my first 2 years I did lousy in college. And that's because I was 19 years old, away from home for the first time ever, with no rules. And I played for the college soccer team, and there was a
Oh yeah,
fraternity
that
and
sounds
all that
a
stuff.
lot of fun.
Yeah. And I remember I always use this, as I went out of my way to do poorly, right? I mean, and so, like, let's say the test would have 4 weeks of lectures. You would have 3 classes a week, so there should be 12 lectures that you should be studying. And I remember, oh, well, I have 5 of them, and maybe I'll talk to John and get his notes, but now I have 6 of them. I'll just study those 6, and I
Mm-hmm.
did really well on the ones that I studied, but
Right.
unfortunately, those were only half of the amounts. And it's not a mystery why I did poorly on the test, right? It wasn't a mystery. And I say you have to go out of your way to do poorly on something, but you also have to go out of your way to do well on something. So why
Right.
not pick the alternative? You have to go out of your way anyways. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other thing I would say is that people really need to look in the mirror and take ownership, like I talked about before. It's not a mystery. Like, somewhere what you're doing is a ruinous behavior, whether it's sneaking a snack here, or it's indulging in something there,
Mm-hmm.
or not getting enough sleep, or
Or
being
indulging in negative behavior.
yeah,
Indulging in a thought process where you're hyping yourself up, with a steady stream of news that is, reaffirming your biases.
Yeah, I think you just have to look in the mirror and say, okay, like if I were to give myself outside eyes and look in on my life, what would I tell myself can't continue? You
Yeah.
know, the job that you hate,
Right.
your schedule, the late night eating, the lack of activity, your relationship that is falling apart. Those aren't mysteries, that
Yeah.
those are impacting you, where a small problem becomes over time unaddressed, a crisis. And that's what
Yes.
happens.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, that's some good stuff right there. That's some really good stuff. And I want to say too, like, hear that and don't be offended,
Right.
right?
Yeah, you
Hear
have to,
that and don't be
yeah,
offended, because you're not alone.
right.
I mean, these are patterns. This is human patterning, like it's not like you're at fault here. And, you have to take all this, burden on that you've messed things up. It,
Right.
it's okay. It's human patterning, and you've fallen into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in terms of weak, thin-skinned, I could understand the truth hurts,
Yeah.
right? It does. And a lot of times we don't want to face it. And people have faced egregious things that they just don't want to open up those wounds again. And that makes sense. And that potentially is someone that needs to have therapy. But when you tie it to, okay, like I've reached the bottom of the bucket, I'm ready to get my health back at all costs, like an athlete,
Yeah.
that the athletes are the best to work with, because it's like, okay, you tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. They're
Right.
just trained that way because they have that tied to the result of, I want to be a star, I want to be a starter, I want to excel, I want to be able to make a difference. And that's what people have to reattach to, is you deserve a healthy, productive, enjoyable, fulfilling life. And that means lock on to that frequency and then become invincible in terms of those things that we're pointing out to you aren't doing it in terms of any biases, in terms of we're putting you down or
Right.
we're judging you. We're not
Right.
judging you. We're just showing you what's not working. And it's up to you to decide if you agree or not and
Right.
move past that.
Right. Right. That's such a good explanation. Because I think some people can turn away from information when they feel attacked, or when they feel like, they're being judged, or other things, that bring on negativity. And it really boils down to not being good enough, right? Everyone thinks they're not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes down to um, just accepting that, I think the two tools that I always recommend my clients that I work with are celebration, right? That's a huge one. Celebration and basics too, like celebrate basics, like celebrate you're alive. You're not
Right.
in a war-torn country and you have running water and you live in a
Right.
house that has, a fridge and whatever.
Yeah.
Celebrate the
Start
basics.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then celebrate your trials and your tribulations, because it still points out that you're alive. I mean, Steve Jobs doesn't have any more trials and tribulations anymore, right? So
Right.
celebrate those, and embrace those, because you're resilient. And then I always say, and then just in terms of those are gratitudes. So be grateful for those, and then celebrate even just the basics, like
Hmm.
you got up today, like you made a difference in someone's life, you
Yeah.
crossed something off your to-do list, you made a great decision, and those will start to build momentum. So I think those are two great
Yeah.
strategies that I always recommend, is celebration and gratitude.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to plug in to information that supports these changes and these things that you're trying to do.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Reinforce it. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Community, being a part of community. Start, reaching out to people who, you think are making changes in their life, or have already created certain habits in their life that is bringing them
Right.
success.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Yep. Hmm.
So, where can people connect with you?
So yeah, well, thank you for asking. I have a website called thetruthaboutadrenalfatigue.com, and I have a YouTube channel called Your Adrenal Fix.
And it's
And
really
I have,
good. That's really
thank you.
good.
Yeah, I have, thank you. I have a podcast called the same thing, Your Adrenal Fix. And then I think it's a funny handle on Instagram. It's called Dr. _ Joel _ Rosen. I think you'll find me if you just search there. And then I also have a Facebook group called The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue that can really plug into, as you just mentioned, the community of people that have these challenges as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk, one final thought, when we talk about, kind of breaking this cycle, if you're at the bottom right now, say, you're not sleeping well, you're just absolutely exhausted, and all of what we've talked about today makes sense to you, what would be the first steps?
First steps. It's a good question. I think that getting your circadian rhythm established. So that means getting to a routine that's synced with the routine of the sun and the moon. That's not going to ever waver. Like, you're going to wake up in the morning and the sun is going to rise, and you're going to go to bed and the sun is going to set. And our body is really coordinated or ingrained in that. So that means protecting your exposures to lights at the times where there's no lights, and exposing yourself to lights at the times when there are lights. And that means making sure you're turning off your notifications and you don't have your phone surgically attached to your fingers in your ear and your hip.
Right.
That's huge. And then that also would give and dictate a proper eating schedule, where you're eating in those light times and you're not eating in the dark times. So I think that's free. And then I would probably layer on the celebration and the gratitude on top of that.
Yeah.
And then eating food that looks like food, and keeping hydrated and moving. It's not fancy schmancy, cost billions of dollars, work with a practitioner that you don't have the ability to work with type of thing, Tammy. It's basic stuff,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if someone is wanting to eliminate things from the other perspective, if there's habits that you can point out that they really should eliminate if they're dealing with this issue, what would be 3 habits that you think get rid of them?
I think caffeine is huge to have to get off of. I hate to say that. I didn't use caffeine all through my undergraduate years. It wasn't until I went through chiropractic college that I started really crushing the caffeine, and that really was not good. So I think it's something that you have to turn off your already overstressed system by not adding more sympathetic, adrenaline-based compounds to your body. I think that's the first. It's a hard thing to have to do, but you can have yeah. Well, it depends where you are,
Yeah.
if you're talking about the worst of the worst, right?
Right. Yes.
I would, you can have for the conditioning and that culture thing, you could have a warm cup of herbal tea in your hand, and that will still give you that comfort feeling that you need and that warmth that you need. I think that would be the first habit, is stopping the caffeine. The second habit would be 2 hours before bed, leave your phone alone. Stop doing your work emails, put it aside, put it in airplane mode, leave it alone, stop doing that. And then the other one I would say would be, the third one would be just movement in general. You don't have to join a gym, but you need to move.
Or run 1,000,000 miles.
Yeah, run 1,000,000 miles. You just need to move and find something that you enjoy. And if you don't enjoy something, then find something that you least enjoy the least, or enjoy the least, or you whatever. But do some kind of movement. I've just started to take up walking, which I run and I walk, but I love walking. I think it's great. I listen to my podcasts. I get the sun out. So those would probably be the 3 things and it's probably one of the most research-based thing that can impact your glucose levels, impact your immune system, impact your lymphatic flow, your circulatory system, your neurochemicals. There's so many good things that are associated with it without overdoing yourself. And everyone could walk to the end of their driveway and back. I just don't accept that. I'm sort of that tough but loving friend of okay, I don't accept that you
Yeah.
can't do that, you know?
Yeah. That's really good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Joel, for being on today. That's a ton of information for everyone, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are benefit from it. And thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. We
Yeah,
need
well, thank
more.
you.
We need
Yeah.
more of this kind of information being spread. Too many people are spinning their wheels trying to figure out what's going on and not getting the answers they need. So thank you.
Well, yeah, well, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I think that's a lesson in terms of when you're doing what you're doing, that you love what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work, right? And
Right.
so for the people that everyone's been put on the earth for a purpose, and you tend to not know it, even though it's right there in front of you, that you enjoy whatever it is that you do and that you have a natural knack for, that hopefully makes everything better, because ultimately, that's what's going to make you better, is that energetic feeling of helping other people is what helps you help yourself. So it's kind of a intrinsic selfishness, if you will, you know?
Yeah. Well, it works synergistically, right? Just like our
Yeah,
bodies.
yeah,
Coincidental.
exactly. It's a win-win, right? For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast today.
Yes, thank you for having me, Tammy.
If the Naturally Inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.